We must correct and rebuke someone who is a believer. We must approach that person privately. We must keep the matter between them and you, personal. Expressing your concern with humility and a desire for resolution. And if that issue persists, then you take 2 or 3 with you. That means at least 4, it could be up to 4 people total. Go and talk to the person again. And those people listen to both sides and make it, say, hey, listen, well, they're right and you're right. Because usually I always tell people there's always 3 sides to every story. Your side, my side, and the truth. And the truth is someplace in there. A lot of times in our minds we misconstrue things. But the whole point is to provide a possibility to rebuild the relationship. It's always about reconciliation. If it still remains after that, you take it to the church. And I don't mean you bring it up here on Sunday morning and we have everybody on stage and we hash it out. No, you take it to the elders. And the elders act as judges in this. And believe me, chances are you're going to chastise them both. It's important to note that the ultimate aim in confronting somebody is to reconcile and restore the relationship. Isn't that what God does with us? When we were sinners, we were apart from God, and what does He do? He reconciles us by what? By the cross. By saving us from our sins through Jesus Christ. He's all about reconciliation. Well, good morning. I haven't had a chance to say that just yet. So glad you're here this morning. We all have responsibilities. We all have things that we are called to do, that we are to do. Things that obligations, you might call them. As married men, we are obligated to our spouses and to our children. We're supposed to be nurturing and loving our wives, and as Christ loves the church, and our children, if we have children, we're to teach them and help them to grow to know the Lord. I'm a firm believer in the fact that men need to be the spiritual leaders in their home. And it's my goal, if any men want to, I'm more than happy to walk through how we do that. In the book of Proverbs, in Proverbs 22:6, the writer says, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. That's wise words. If we teach our children, it's interesting. Caleb is now 14 and Abigail is 12, and I'm starting to see a lot of those things that I've taught them when they were young. I'm seeing the benefit of the things that I've taught them. So this verse holds a lot in me. I remind myself of it all the time. If I train them up the way they should go, then they won't depart from it. Now, the obvious thing with that is that if I'm training them the way I should go, that means I need to be going the way I should go. But we're to provide for our families. Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy 5:8, he says, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he says he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. We also have obligations to our community. We're to be good citizens in our community. We're not supposed to be going around tearing things up. We're supposed to be obeying the laws. We're to pray for our worldly leaders. We're also supposed to pray for our church leaders. And we are to support our church and our community with our talents and our tithes. But it seems unfortunate today, I think, that our humanity seems to have a tendency to pull us away from our obligations. If we look at the world today, there are a lot of men who were married and have just ignored the obligation they have to their family. A lot of mothers who have forgotten the obligation they have to their children. A lot of people have forgotten the obligation they have to their country. And I'm talking about the leaders that we have in Congress right now. I think a lot of them have forgotten their obligation, what they're there for. And many people have forgotten the obligation that they should have to God Himself. We place those obligations on the back burner. We forget to pray for those that we should be praying for. When our finances are thin, we have a tendency to pull back instead of being generous. When God promises that if we are generous at all times, He will do more than we could ever imagine. In the book of Malachi, they were struggling because they weren't providing for the temple. And Malachi tells them, he says, bring the full tithe into the storehouse. In Malachi 3:10, he says that there may be food in my house. And thereby put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you a blessing until there is no more need. And I believe that that's more than just talking about money. It's talking about all of it. If we pour ourselves into being the people we're supposed to be in our families, and the people we're supposed to be in our communities, and people we're supposed to be in our church, God is going to pour out blessings. I'm not talking financial. I'm just talking about the peace that comes. And yes, we're going to have struggles, but there's peace that's going to happen. We're going to have struggles in this world. We know that. We know that persecution is coming. We shouldn't be surprised when we have struggles in the world. It aligns with what Jesus himself taught his disciples before he went to the cross. He tells them in John 15:19, he says, if you were of the world would love you as its own. So you wonder why the world hates you at times? Well, that's why, because you're not part of it. He said, but I chose you out of the world because you are not of this world. I chose you out of the world. Therefore, the world hates you. The world he's talking about are those who haven't surrendered their lives to Christ. And I'm not saying that everybody who does is perfect. What I'm saying is it begins by surrendering. The world hasn't surrendered. They're in rebellion to God. But we're not to be part of this world. We're supposed to live lives that are countercultural. We're not participating in the rebellion of this world. This is all part of God's plan for us, remaining here despite the hostilities that we see in the world towards us. But he hasn't just thrown us out there. He hasn't just thrown us out there without any life preservers. He hasn't thrown us into the deep end without any of the resources we need to survive, because the divine provisions he has made for us is there to support us believers, including divine protection. And his presence in response to Jesus' prayer. When Jesus was praying one time, he says, I do not ask that you take them out of the world. He's talking to his Father. He says, but that you keep them from the evil one. In this world, we're going to have persecution, but we have God with us to make it through it. Now, many times he may take it away from us. He may protect us. I think of the story of Job. Job was supernaturally protected by God, and Satan, Hasatan, comes to God and says, and when God says, have you seen my servant Job? And Satan says, well, yeah, because you protect him. No wonder he believes in you. And God says, okay, I remove the protection, but you can't kill him. You can't touch him. See, God protects us. He keeps us from things. Just think about what would happen if God did not protect us. And I'm sure you guys have felt the same way I have at times when, you're coming up on a light and you're like, I just feel like I need to stop. And you stop and the car blazes through and blows the red light. And if you had not stopped, you would have hit that other car. Or they would have hit you. God protects us. We receive divine guidance on how we are to conduct ourselves in this world. And the purpose of this guidance is not to create in us this pride like we're better than everybody else. Or to make us be contemptible towards those who haven't surrendered their lives. But it's to look at the lost with compassion. Knowing that they're lost. Knowing what they should have and what they could have if they would just surrender. But instead they choose to be in rebellion against God. So Paul continues to admonish Titus, and he reminds us of our responsibilities. If you go to Titus 3, verses 1 to 2 is what we're looking at this morning. He says, remind them, he's telling them to remind the people, to remind those believers in the church, to be submissive to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one, to avoid quarreling, to be gentle, and to show perfect courtesy toward all people. Now, could you imagine that Paul thought about this, and this is just very much valid for today. Paul asserts that God establishes authority. We are called to submit to authority and be obedient to it. In Romans, he tells them, let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Now listen, I don't particularly care for every president we've ever had in my life. But I also know that God put them there for whatever reason. And they had a choice whether they would follow him or not. And if they don't, ultimately they come out. There's no doubt. And their sins will find them out. It may take a while. But I need to be submissive to them. And I'll qualify that in a moment here. He says, therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not terror to good conduct, but to bad. What he's saying is, if you're good, if you're behaving yourself, you don't have anything to worry about the rulers. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. But being submissive to our leaders begins, first of all, by praying for them. I'm afraid today, not very many people pray for our leaders. Again, Paul tells Timothy, 1 Timothy 2, he says, first of all, then I urge that supplication, prayer, and intercessions and thanksgiving be made for all people. And then he lists for kings and all who are in high positions, that we, and why? So that we may lead peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. If we're praying for our leaders and they're leaving us alone, then we can lead peaceful lives. Maybe we haven't been praying enough for our leaders. Now, while acknowledging we have this duty to obedience, no doubt, and the Bible also highlights, though, there are instances where civil disobedience may be warranted, such as when the earthly rulers commands conflict the will of God. And believe me, there have been plenty of times when our rulers have not done things that go along with the will of God, and we are to disobey those rules. I want to give you an example, and there are many in Scripture, but many of you who've been in church long enough, you know this story. This comes from the book of Daniel. King Nebuchadnezzar, it says in Daniel 3, it says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors. So these are all the rulers, all the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, and the counselors, and the treasurers, and the justices, and the magistrates, all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and the herald proclaimed aloud, You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, the harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But there's a problem. Within that nation are a group of people who were brought in captivity from Jerusalem. And their God says he is the only one that is to be worshipped. That's Yahweh. They're to worship God alone, as we are. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, 3 friends of Daniel who were brought, those are not their Jewish names, those are their Babylonian names. They refuse to bow to the image. They are defying the authorities. They are disobeying the king. Well, how could they do that if we're supposed to obey our rulers? It's because when our rulers say something that's against what God says, we are to disobey them. So, what's going to happen? In Daniel, verse 13, it says that Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? These weren't just common folks. These were men who were in the government. They were part of his administration. He says that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up. Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the hornpipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well, then good. But if you do not worship it, you shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. They told him, King, our God can protect us. But if he doesn't, oh well. So they're thrown into the fiery furnace. And they come out without a char mark, and they don't even smell like they've been in a fire. And the amazing thing is when they were in the fire, Nebuchadnezzar sees 4 men in there instead of 3. The 4th one we believe, is a Christophany. It's a presentation of Jesus Christ. It's Jesus Christ in the flesh at that time in the Old Testament. God protected them. Jesus was with them, even though they were not obedient to the king. But it wasn't just because they didn't want to be obedient. They didn't like what the king had said. It was because it was going against God's will.